The alien night was alive with fear. The forest glowed with burning trees, their branches twisting like black skeletons against the blood-red sky. Ash floated in the air like snow, and every breath felt heavy, like breathing smoke and dust. The ground shook again, tum-tum, as something huge moved through shadows. The cries of alien creatures echoed across the land, a mix of snarls, screeches, and hunting calls. It was a world that hated the weak. Daniel, the human soldier, crouched low behind a pile of broken stone. His body ached from days of running since his patrol ship had crashed on this cursed planet. His armor was scratched, his rifle running low on charge, and his water pack nearly empty. He had survived through discipline and instinct, but deep inside, he knew he couldn't last forever. That was when he heard it, a sound out of place. Small, soft, fragile. The sound of crying. Daniel froze. His heart hammered as he pressed his ear against the stone. Yes, it was there again. A whimper, a child's voice, but not a human voice. The pitch was strange, the rhythm different. Still, it carried the same pain and fear that any child's cry would. Logic screamed at him to leave. This planet was full of traps. Sounds like that could lure the desperate to their deaths. But Daniel wasn't just a soldier. He was still human. And some part of him, the part that remembered his own little sister back home, couldn't ignore it. Slowly, he crept forward, careful to avoid branches that snapped too loud, or stones that rolled underfoot. His eyes scanned the burning forest until he found the source. There, in a small clearing lit by firelight, lay a little girl. Not human. Her skin glowed faintly, pale like pearl under moonlight, but with soft, shifting colors, hints of violet and blue that shimmered when she moved. Her hair was tangled and dusty, falling across her thin face, but her eyes were what caught him. They were enormous, glowing like lanterns, full of terror as they stared at the shadows around her. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 in human years. Around her, the bodies of strange creatures lay torn apart. Shattered crates and broken metal suggested some kind of attack. Maybe her people had abandoned her. Maybe they had been killed. Daniel didn't know. All he knew was this child had been left alone in the worst place possible. And she wasn't alone for long. From the treeline, something moved. A beast. It stepped into the firelight with a deep growl, and Daniel's breath caught in his chest. The monster was taller than 2 men, its body thick with armored scales that shimmered in orange firelight. Its head was long and heavy, with jaws full of jagged teeth that dripped saliva onto the dirt. Its eyes burned like molten iron. 2 more creatures followed behind it, circling the girl like wolves stalking prey. The girl whimpered, curling tighter against the broken crate. Daniel's finger tightened on his rifle. He knew the risk. One wrong move, and the whole pack would be on him. He should have walked away. But he couldn't. Not now. Stay down, he whispered under his breath. Even though she couldn't understand him. The first beast lunged. Daniel didn't wait. His rifle fired in a flash of blue plasma. The bolt tore through the monster's skull, sending it crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. The other beasts roared, their screeches like knives in the night. Daniel sprang from cover, firing again and again. Each shot echoed like thunder, lighting up the clearing with bursts of blue. One beast fell, then another, but more shadows moved at the edges of the fire. His rifle's charge dropped fast. Sparks hissed at the barrel. The last monster pounced, its claws slicing through the air. Daniel rolled, fired point blank, and watched it collapse in a heap of burning flesh. Silence returned, except for the small sobs of the alien child. Breathing hard, Daniel lowered his weapon. Smoke drifted from the barrel. His ears rang from the noise. But he was alive, and so was she. He approached slowly, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. The girl shrank back, her glowing eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak his language, but fear was universal. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said softly, his voice calm now. "You're safe." The girl shook her head, trembling. But when he knelt in front of her, something in his voice seemed to reach her. She reached out one small hand, shaking, and touched his sleeve. Her skin was warm, softer than human, and for a moment Daniel felt something he hadn't felt since the crash. Hope. He carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, as if she hadn't eaten in days. She buried her face against his chest, still crying softly, but she held on to him. That was enough. As he carried her back into the shadows, Daniel looked at the dark forest. More glowing eyes watched from the distance. Monsters would come again. Supplies were still low. He didn't even know who she was. But one thing had changed. He wasn't fighting for just himself anymore. He was fighting for her. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, his words, simple human words, would echo across a galaxy. They would change her life. And one day, they would change everything. Daniel moved through the alien forest with the girl in his arms, every step echoing the weight of his new responsibility. The ground was uneven, full of jagged roots that seemed to ride like snakes under his boots. Overhead, the sky burned with strange lights, 2 moons glowing pale and thin behind clouds of smoke. He knew the monsters would return. They always did. The girl clung to him tightly, her small hands gripping the torn edges of his armor. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, the kind of breathing Daniel had heard from wounded soldiers after battle. She was terrified, but she was also alive. After nearly an hour of careful movement, Daniel found an abandoned bunker carved into a rocky hillside. Its doors were broken, its walls cracked, but offered shelter from the roaming predators. He slipped inside, laid the girl gently on a piece of broken fabric, and secured the entrance with debris. It wasn't much, but for the first time that night, they were safe. Daniel crouched beside her and studied her face in the dim light. Her glowing eyes shifted between violet and blue as she watched him warily. Her skin shimmered faintly even in the dark, like a pearl catching invisible light. She looked fragile, too fragile for a world like this. He reached into his pack and pulled out the last protein ration bar he had. Breaking it in half, he offered her a piece. She stared at it, sniffed it carefully, and then nibbled like a frightened animal. After a pause, she ate more eagerly, finishing it quickly. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's better," he said softly. He doubted she understood the words, but his tone seemed to calm her. When she finished, she curled up under the fabric, but her glowing eyes never left him. She was still afraid, still uncertain if he was truly safe. Daniel leaned back against the wall, rifle resting across his knees. He should have been thinking about his survival, supplies, escape routes, communication with his fleet. But all he could think about was the child. Why had she been left behind? Who were her people? Why had no one come for her? Questions filled his mind, but no answers came. The only thing he knew was that she was alone. Alone until now. As the hours passed, the forest outside roared with monsters again. Their cries echoed to the metal walls, sending vibrations across the floor. The girl whimpered and covered her ears. Without thinking, Daniel reached out and placed his hand gently on hers. She froze, staring at him with wide eyes. "It's all right," he whispered. "I've got you." Her hand trembled, then slowly tightened around his. Something passed between them in that moment. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his intent. She wasn't alone anymore. The night stretched on, long and dangerous. Daniel barely slept, keeping his weapon close, scanning the shadows at every sound. When dawn finally broke, light spilled through the cracks in the bunker walls. The girl stirred, blinking at the morning sky. For the first time, Daniel saw a faint smile on her face. It was small, fragile, but it was there. He nodded to himself. "We'll make it through this," he said, more to her than to himself. The day was spent searching for food and water. Daniel left her hidden in the bunker while he scouted nearby streams. He returned with a container of murky water that he boiled using a small portable burner. The girl watched him with fascination, tilting her head as though she had never seen such things before. When he handed her the cup, she drank slowly, then looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. Step by step, trust was forming. But danger never stayed away for long. That evening, while Daniel prepared a crude barrier of branches outside the bunker, a distant howl split the air. It was deeper, louder, more powerful than the cries from the night before. The girl stiffened, her glowing eyes widening in fear. Daniel knew immediately this was no ordinary predator. Something bigger was hunting, something that had caught their scent. He crouched by the entrance, checking his rifle charge. Barely 30% left. Not nearly enough for another battle like the last. His jaw tightened. If the creature came, he'd have to fight smart, not strong. The girl shuffled closer, tugging at his arm. She spoke then, her voice soft, melodic, and filled with fear. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was asking if they would survive. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "We will. I promise." The words meant nothing in her language, but promises had power. Something in his voice, in his calm expression, seemed to give her strength. As the forest outside grew darker, Daniel realized something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about keeping his promise. And in a world full of monsters, his words might be the only shield she had. And so, a fragile bond was born between a human soldier and an alien child. Neither of them knew it yet, but that bond would shake the stars. The second night in the bunker was different. The air itself seemed heavier, as though the forest outside was holding its breath. Even the smaller predators kept quiet, their growls silenced by something far more dangerous moving through the shadows. Daniel stayed at the entrance, his rifle ready, while the girl sat huddled inside, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She had barely spoken, her language a mystery, but she stayed close to him now, no longer shrinking away. Fear still lingered in her gaze, but trust had begun to grow alongside it. Then it came, the sound of something massive. The ground trembled with each step, sending vibrations through the walls of the bunker. Daniel gripped his weapon tighter. The howls from earlier hadn't lied. Something bigger was hunting. A shadow passed by the crack in the bunker wall. For a moment, Daniel saw it, a hulking shape moving with terrifying grace. Its scales shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the moonlight. Its claws sank deep into the dirt, and its tail swung behind it like a whip strong enough to shatter steel. The girl whimpered, her small hands clinging to Daniel's arm. He glanced down at her and forced a calm expression. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The beast stopped. Its glowing red eyes peered through the cracks, scanning the bunker like a predator smelling prey. Daniel's heart hammered, but he didn't move. He held his breath, waiting. Then, with a roar that shook the ground, the monster slammed its claws against the bunker entrance. The debris Daniel had piled collapsed instantly. Dust filled the air. The girl screamed and buried her face in his chest. Daniel fired. Blue plasma bolts lit up the night as he aimed for the creature's head. The shots hit, but the beast barely flinched. It was armored, tougher than anything he had faced before. "Damn it," Daniel muttered, pulling the girl back as the monster's claws tore through the entrance. They couldn't stay. If they stayed, they would die. "Come on," he shouted, scooping her into his arms. He dashed through a side passage of bunker, ducking falling metal and crumbling stone as the creature's roars echoed behind them. The tunnel led them back into the burning forest, where the night glowed red with fire. The monster followed, its massive body smashing through trees, its tail whipping aside boulders as if they were twigs. Daniel ran as fast as he could, weaving through the terrain, but the girl clung to him tighter, crying softly against his shoulder. Then it happened. The creature lunged, knocking Daniel off balance. He fell, rolling across the dirt, still holding the girl tightly. His rifle flew from his hands, landing several feet away. The beast towered over them, saliva dripping from its jaws. Its roar shook the ground as it prepared to strike. Daniel shielded the girl with his body, whispering one last desperate promise. "I won't let it hurt you." And then something impossible happened. The girl screamed, but it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a sound that vibrated with power, a sound that seemed to cut through the very air. Her glowing eyes blazed brighter than ever, shining with fierce light. The monster froze. From the girl's tiny hands, a wave of energy pulsed outward, brilliant, shimmering light that cracked the ground beneath them. It struck the beast full force, throwing it back into the trees with an explosion of sparks and fire. The forest lit up as though a star had fallen among the branches. Daniel stared in shock, his arms still around her. The girl collapsed against him, drained, her glow dimming again. She was breathing, but weak. The monster staggered to its feet, injured but alive. It snarled, its rage even stronger now. But Daniel had seen enough. He grabbed his rifle, pulled the girl close, and fired again, aiming for the cracks in its scales. Plasma bolts seared through the weak spots, burning into its chest and neck. Finally, with a final roar, the beast collapsed, shaking the ground one last time before going still. Silence returned. Daniel knelt there, holding the girl tightly. His chest heaved with exhaustion. She was unconscious, her tiny hand gripping his sleeve even in her sleep. He brushed a strand of her glowing hair from her face, staring at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "What are you?" he whispered. She wasn't just a helpless child. She had power. Power that could turn the tide of battles. Power that could terrify monsters that ruled this world. Whoever she was far more important than he had imagined. And Daniel knew then, protecting her wasn't just about saving one life. It might be about saving many. As dawn broke, the forest lay quiet, scarred by fire and battle. Daniel carried the girl back to the ruins of the bunker, his mind racing. His mission had changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was guarding a secret that could change the fate of entire worlds. Morning came slowly, its pale light breaking through the smoke that still hung over the ruined forest. Daniel sat against the cracked wall of the bunker, his rifle resting across his lap. His eyes were heavy from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stay awake. The girl lay beside him, wrapped in what little cloth he had managed to salvage, her breathing soft and steady. She hadn't woken since the night before. Daniel glanced at her glowing skin, the faint shimmer still flickering across her arms, and replayed what he'd seen over and over. A blast of raw energy, powerful enough to throw a monster twice his size across the clearing. A scream that could shake the air itself. He rubbed a hand across his tired face. "You're not ordinary," he murmured, almost to himself. He thought back to the battlefield, to the broken crates scattered around where he had found her. They hadn't looked like human design. They had been alien tech, strong, complex, purposeful, and she had been left behind, not lost by accident, abandoned. Daniel's stomach tightened at the thought. Who leaves a child like her to die? Monsters wouldn't have spared her, which meant someone else had. Someone who wanted her gone. The sound of a branch snapping broke his thoughts. Daniel stiffened. Slowly, he raised his rifle and peered through a gap in the wall. At first, he saw only smoke and ash drifting through the trees. Then shapes moved, figures, not beasts, tall, armored, walking with precision. They carried weapons, long and sharp, glowing faintly with alien energy. Hunters. Daniel cursed under his breath. These weren't predators acting on instinct. These were soldiers. Intelligent, organized, and searching for something, or someone. The girl stirred faintly in her sleep, whimpering. Daniel leaned closer, whispering, "Stay quiet, little one." He crawled to the far end of the bunker and peered through another crack. 3 of them moved through the trees, scanning the ground with glowing instruments. Their skin was pale, with dark ridges along their heads, their eyes sharp and cruel. They weren't here for food. They were tracking. One of the hunters knelt, brushing his clawed fingers across the dirt. He hissed something in a guttural language and pointed directly toward the bunker. Daniel's pulse quickened. They knew. He slid back to the girl, who was now half awake, her glowing eyes watching him weakly. He placed a finger over his lips, signaling for silence. She seemed to understand. The hunters approached. Their heavy footsteps crunched against stone and ash. The leader raised the device, and it beeped sharply as it locked onto a signal. The girl's faint glow betrayed them. Daniel swore under his breath. No time left. With one swift motion, he scooped her into his arms, grabbed his rifle, and burst from the side opening of the bunker. Plasma bolts hissed into the dirt where they had been moments before. The forest came alive with shouts. The hunters roared, chasing after them, their weapons firing bursts of crackling light that burned into the trees. Daniel weaved between trunks, his boots pounding the ground, the girl clinging tightly to his chest. One blast struck near his leg, the shock wave throwing him forward. He rolled, gritting his teeth, and returned fire. A plasma bolt caught one of the hunters in the chest, sending him crashing against a tree. The others snarled and spread out, cutting him off from every angle. Daniel ducked behind a fallen log, his breath ragged. The girl trembled in his arms, her glow pulsing faintly as though responding to her fear. He touched her cheek quickly. "Not now," he whispered, knowing she couldn't control what had happened the night before. "Stay with me, please." He peeked over the log, spotted movement, and fired. One hunter fell, but the others pressed closer, their voices sharp and commanding. Daniel could feel it. They weren't trying to kill him. Their eyes weren't on him at all. They wanted her. Daniel's stomach twisted with anger. Whoever she was, whatever she was, these things wanted her gone. That made his choice easy. He waited until the last hunter stepped close, then pulled a grenade from his belt, the last one he had. He pulled the pin, hurled it, and ducked. The explosion ripped through the clearing, fire and dirt raining down. When the smoke cleared, the hunters were gone, scattered or dead. Silence returned. Daniel leaned against the log, chest heaving. His ears rang from the blast, his arms aching from carrying the girl. She looked up at him now, her eyes wide, shimmering with tears. She spoke softly in her alien tongue, the words like music, but he couldn't understand. Still, he felt the meaning, gratitude, trust. Daniel brushed ash from her hair and gave her a tired smile. "I told you, I'm not letting anyone take you." As the fire burned low in the distance, Daniel finally realized something bigger was at play. Monsters had tried to kill her. Hunters had tried to capture her. Both had failed. And somewhere in the shadows of this world, there were likely more who wanted her gone. She wasn't just a child. She was someone important, someone powerful, someone the galaxy feared. And Daniel had just made himself her only shield. The forest lay in ruins after the battle with the hunters. Smoke drifted above the shattered trees, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and scorched earth. Daniel leaned against a rock, his chest heaving, his rifle heavy in his hands. The girl sat close beside him, her tiny body pressed against his arm, as though she feared he might vanish if she let go. He studied her in the pale morning light. Her skin shimmered faintly, her glowing eyes shifting between violet and blue like living jewels. The power she had unleashed days ago still haunted him. She was more than just a survivor. She was something far greater, and that made her dangerous, not because of what she was, but because of who would want her destroyed. "Who are you, kid?" Daniel whispered. He didn't expect an answer, but the girl tilted her head, blinking at him, and then she raised a trembling hand. She touched her chest and spoke a single word, soft but clear. "Lyra." Daniel froze. It was the first time she had spoken a word he could understand. Not in his language, not fully, but somehow her voice carried meaning he grasped. "Lyra, that was her name." He gave her a faint smile. "Lyra, huh? That's a good name." She repeated it, this time pointing at him. Her glowing eyes searched his face with innocence and curiosity. "Daniel," he said, tapping his chest. "My name's Daniel." Her lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "Danelle." It was the first time he had seen her smile. Despite the fear, despite the exhaustion, it filled him with a strange warmth. For a brief moment, in the middle of this nightmare, there was hope, but reality returned quickly. Daniel scanned the tree-line, knowing the hunters weren't done. They had been tracking her, which meant they would come again. He needed answers. He needed to know who she really was. Over the next hours, Daniel carried Lyra deeper into the forest, away from the scorched clearing. They crossed rivers of dark water, climbed over ridges of jagged stone, and avoided nests of smaller predators. Lyra stayed quiet, her eyes wide as she clung to him, but sometimes she pointed toward things he didn't notice. Hidden paths, safe ground, even edible plants. It was as though some instinct guided her. By evening, they found shelter in the hollow of a massive tree trunk, its interior wide enough to fit them both. Daniel set up a small fire, using the last of his survival pack supplies. The flames cast flickering shadows across the bark walls, and Lyra sat close, her glowing skin reflecting the light. Daniel tore open a ration and handed her a piece. She accepted it gratefully, eating slowly. Then she looked at him and, in her broken way, tried to speak again. "Daniel home?" Daniel's chest tightened. Home. She wanted to know where he came from. He stared at the fire for a long moment, then answered softly, "Earth. My home is far away. Too far." She tilted her head, as though trying to picture it. Then she pointed at herself and spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Queen." Daniel blinked. He leaned forward, studying her expression. "Queen? Did you just say queen?" Lyra nodded, her small face serious. She pressed her hand to her chest again. "Lyra, queen." Daniel sat back, his mind racing. A child queen? Was it possible? Had she been royalty? An heir abandoned in the chaos of war? It would explain everything. The hunters, the monsters, the fact she had been left to die. Someone wanted her gone because she was a threat to their power. He looked at her again, at her glowing eyes and fragile form. She didn't look like a queen. She looked like a child who had lost everything. But maybe both could be true. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Great. I crash on the worst planet in the system, and I find a child queen with godlike powers." He chuckled dryly. "Lucky me." Lyra tilted her head, confused by his tone, but when she saw his faint smile, she gave him one in return. That night, as she slept curled beside him, Daniel stayed awake, watching the fire die down. The weight of his decision pressed on him heavier than ever. He wasn't just protecting a child. He was guarding a queen. If she survived, if she grew, she might one day reclaim whatever throne had been stolen from her. But that meant more hunters would come. More battles. More danger. Daniel rested his hand gently on the hilt of his rifle. His promise to her wasn't just words anymore. It was a vow. He would protect her, no matter what came. And though he didn't know it, forces across the stars were already moving. Word of the lost queen would not stay hidden for long. Dawn broke cold and gray. Mist rolled across the forest floor, curling around the charred remains of trees and the scars of old battles. Daniel crouched by the edge of a cliff, scanning the valley below through the cracked scope of his rifle. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of figures moved in formation. Hunters, but not just a scouting party. This was an army. Rows of armored soldiers marched through the valley, their weapons glowing with alien light. Behind them rumbled heavy transports, jagged vehicles that tore the earth apart as they rolled forward. And towering above all of it were war beasts, chained but fierce, their roars shaking the air. Daniel lowered the scope, jaw tight. They weren't searching blindly anymore. They were mobilizing. They wanted Lyra, and they were willing to burn the whole forest to get her. Behind him, Lyra sat on a rock, hugging her knees as she watched him with wide eyes. She looked tired, her glow faint after days of running, but her spirit hadn't broken. When Daniel turned toward her, she tilted her head, as if asking silently what he had seen. He knelt in front of her. "Bad news, kid," he said softly. "They're coming. A lot of them." She blinked slowly, then reached out and touched his chest with her small hand. "Daniel fight?" Daniel gave a short laugh. "Yeah, we fight, but not head-on, not against all of them." She frowned, her glowing eyes sharpening in a way that looked far older than her years. "Queen, fight," she whispered firmly, almost as if reminding him of who she was. Daniel studied her. She wasn't just a scared child anymore. In those glowing eyes, he could see a spark of determination. "Fragile, yes, but real." He nodded. "All right, Queen, then we make our stand." They retreated deeper into the cliffs, where Daniel found a cave system. The tunnels wound through stone and crystal, some passages narrow, others wide enough to hold entire beasts. It was defensible, and more importantly, it offered high ground. Daniel set traps with a few explosives he had left. Wires stretched across tunnels, plasma charges hidden beneath rubble. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lyra followed him silently, watching everything he did. At one point, she knelt beside a jagged crystal wall, placed her small hand on it, and closed her eyes. To Daniel's shock, the crystal pulsed faintly, glowing in rhythm with her skin. For a brief moment, he felt the air vibrate, like a heartbeat passing through the stone itself. She opened her eyes again, looking exhausted. Daniel crouched beside her. "What did you just do?" Lyra only whispered, "Help." He didn't understand, but somehow he believed her. The first wave of hunters arrived by nightfall, their torches cut through the mist, their voices echoing in alien commands. Daniel waited, rifle steady. Lyra crouched behind him. When the first soldier stepped into the cave, Daniel triggered the charge. The explosion tore through the tunnel, sending rock crashing down on half the squad. The survivors roared, firing blindly into the shadows. Daniel shot back, his plasma bolt striking with deadly precision. "Stay low," he shouted, glancing at Lyra. She obeyed, but her glowing eyes never left him. The fight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Every blast of his rifle echoed like thunder. Every charge he set ripped through the stone halls. But there were too many. For each hunter that fell, two more pushed forward. Finally, Daniel's rifle clicked empty. His last charge was gone. He pressed his back against the stone, sweat pouring down his face, his body aching. "Damn it," he muttered. The hunters advanced slowly now, confident of their victory. Their leader raised a spear crackling with energy, pointing it directly at Daniel and Lyra. Lyra stood, her glow intensified, brighter than ever before, her small body trembling as light poured from her skin. She raised her hands, her voice ringing out in that strange, melodic language Daniel couldn't understand. But the meaning was clear. Power erupted. The cave lit up as a wave of shimmering energy blasted outward. Hunters were thrown against the walls, weapons ripped from their hands. The very crystals embedded in the rock glowed, resonating with her power, amplifying it until the entire cave became a storm of light. Daniel shielded his eyes, but even through the brilliance he saw it. The hunters falling back, their leader staggering under the force. Lyra's voice grew louder, filled with fury and pain, until finally the energy burst in one final wave that collapsed the entrance of the cave, sealing them inside. Silence. Smoke drifted through the air. The hunters were gone, buried under stone, or fleeing into the night. Daniel blinked, lowering his arm, and turned to Lyra. She collapsed into his arms, her glow fading, her breath shallow. "Lyra." Daniel's voice cracked. He shook her gently, panic rising in his chest. Her eyes fluttered open weakly, and she whispered one word, her voice fragile but steady. "Promise." Daniel held her tightly, his throat tight. "I promise, and I'm keeping it. You hear me? I'm not letting them take you." She closed her eyes again, her small body relaxing against him. Daniel sat there in a ruined cave, cradling her in his arms, and knew the truth. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. And somewhere beyond the stars, those who had abandoned their queen would soon learn she was not alone. Not while Daniel still drew breath. The cave was silent except for the drip of water echoing from unseen cracks. Dust hung in the air, glowing faintly in the dim light of the crystals that still pulsed from Lyra's outburst. Daniel sat against the wall, cradling her small form in his arms. She was breathing, but weak, her glow faint as though the energy had burned through her strength. He brushed the hair from her face gently. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Not anymore." But Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. Outside, the hunters would regroup. Armies didn't stop after one setback. They would come again and stronger. He had bought time, nothing more. As if to confirm his fears, the muffled roar of engines rolled to the forest above. He crawled to a crack in the stone and peered out. His heart sank. Dozens of ships hovered over the valley, their lights slicing through the mist. Squadrons of hunters poured out, forming lines of steel and fire. They weren't just searching now. They were preparing to wipe the land clean. Daniel pressed his forehead against the cold stone. He couldn't fight that. Not alone. Not with one rifle and a handful of grenades. But then he looked back at Lyra. She stirred faintly, her glowing eyes meeting his. In them he saw something unbroken, something far greater than fear. "Queen," she whispered weakly, pressing her hand against her chest. Daniel shook his head. "You're more than a queen. You're hope." By dawn, the hunters had surrounded the cliffside. Their leader stood tall at the front, his jagged spear raised high. He barked orders in his guttural tongue, his voice echoing across the valley. Behind him, war beasts snarled, their chains straining as they were prepared for release. Inside the cave, Daniel tightened the straps of his damaged armor. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, checking its last cell of charge. He didn't fool himself. This wasn't a battle he could win. But it didn't matter. He had made a promise. "Lyra," he said softly, kneeling in front of her, "they want you because they know what you are. But they'll never take you. Do you understand? Not while I'm still breathing." She reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "Danelle promise." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, always." The hunters charged. Daniel met them at the cave mouth, his rifle spitting blue fire into the crowd. One by one they fell, but more came, their war cries shaking the ground. Explosions tore through the rock as their weapons blasted into the cliff. Daniel's armor cracked, his skin burned, but he stood firm, every shot buying another second for Lyra. When the rifle finally clicked empty, he dropped it and drew his combat knife. The first hunter lunged, and Daniel met him head-on, slamming the blade through his armor. Blood hissed on the ground. Another came, and Daniel fought like a man possessed, his body a storm of rage and desperation. "Come on," he roared, cutting down another. "You want her, you go through me." They swarmed him, weapons slashing, claws tearing. He was knocked to the ground, blood pouring from his side. Still, he rose again, staggering but unbroken. For every hunter that struck him down, he struck one back. And then Lyra screamed. Her glow exploded into blinding brilliance. The hunters froze as the cave shook, the crystals pulsing in rhythm with her voice. Daniel fell to his knees, watching in awe as the little girl he had carried to the forest rose to her feet, her body blazing with light. She raised her arms, and the energy surged outward like a tidal wave. Hunters were hurled back by the hundreds. War beasts shattered their chains and fled. And the very ships in the sky shuddered as the storm of power consumed the valley. When the light faded, silence followed. The hunters were gone. The ships scattered into the sky like frightened birds. The ground lay scarred, but it was over. Daniel collapsed, his strength finally failing. He felt small hands on his face, warm and gentle. Lyra knelt beside him, tears glowing on her cheeks. "Dan, no die," she whispered desperately. He gave her a weak smile. "I told you, kid." Promise kept. She pressed her forehead to his, her glow pulsing with steady rhythm. And then, somehow, Daniel felt his wounds ease, his breath return. Her power wasn't just destruction. It was healing, too. She had given him back the strength he had given her. Days later, the forest grew quiet again. Daniel and Lyra stood on a ridge, watching the horizon. The hunters hadn't returned. Rumors would spread through the stars that the lost queen still lived and that she wasn't alone. Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to change everything, Lyra. The galaxy won't be the same after this." She looked up at him, her eyes glowing softly, and spoke the word she had learned from him, the one she seemed to love most: promise. Daniel smiled. Humanity had always been underestimated by the galaxy. Fragile, short-lived, unremarkable. But one man's words had carried through the chaos of war, shaping the fate of a child who could one day rule worlds. And somewhere in the endless stars, those who had tried to break her would learn the truth. Humans didn't abandon their own.